Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, September 9th, 2024. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us. Congress returned from its summer recess today with members facing a September 30th government funding deadline and multiple reports saying that even though prospects of a shutdown are low, the dynamics of getting an agreement are still difficult. We'll tell you what House Speaker Mike Johnson is pushing, what the Democratic response is to that, and what its prospects are coming up. We are a little more than 24 hours away from the first and possibly only debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. It happens Tuesday night at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. We'll tell you how both candidates have been preparing and what some experts think each should do to help their performance. And in a new report, House Foreign Affairs Chair Michael McCaul is accusing President Biden of demanding a U.S. exit from Afghanistan, no matter the cost. The report comes after a 3-year investigation into the U.S. withdrawal. We'll hear more from Chair McCaul and the Democrats' response coming up. We begin on Capitol Hill, where House members have 13 working days and senators have 15 working days before government funding runs out. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer talked about it earlier on the Senate floor.
The Senate is back in session for what will be 3 very busy, fast-paced, and consequential few weeks. This afternoon, we'll hold our first vote on cloture on the nomination of Adam Abelson to be a district judge for the District of Maryland. For the information of senators, I've also filed cloture on the nomination of Jeanette Vargas to be a district judge for the Southern District of New York. For the rest of the week, and for the rest of the work period, we'll be confirming more of President Biden's outstanding judicial nominees. And now, as everyone knows, one of the most important things we must do this work period is avoid a government shutdown. Today is September 9th. Funding for the federal government will expire in 21 days unless Republicans work with Democrats on a temporary extension. As has been done time and time again, keeping the government open will require bipartisanship. Keeping the government open will mean no poison pills or reckless partisan posturing. And keeping the government open will mean tuning out the bully tactics of the hard right. Sadly, our House Republican counterparts are not off to a promising start. Last week, House Republicans released, without even consulting the Democratic leaders of the House and Senate or the President, a 6-month CR that is transparently unserious and seemingly designed for scoring political points instead of avoiding a shutdown. In fact, Madam President, it is so unserious that the White House has already issued a veto threat. It's a shame that the House of Representatives is once again wasting time catering to the hard right, instead of doing the hard work of responsible bipartisan governance. Speaker Johnson's slapdash continuing resolution isn't a serious effort to fund our government. If House Republicans were serious, they would sit down and craft a bill in a bipartisan fashion, consulting with me, the House Democratic leader, and the White House.
Now, we'll tell you more about that Republican proposal in a minute. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell also spoke during leader time. He talked about national security.
Needless to say, with August behind us, Congress' own unfinished business has become even more glaring. The President's meager defense budget request was already an insufficient starting point for top-line funding discussions when they began literally months ago. Today, constraints on Congress' ability to provide for the common defense are even more dangerous, and demands for parity with non-defense discretionary spending even more reckless. Meanwhile, continued failure to process the must-pass National Defense Authorization Act puts the lie to any suggestion that the Senate Democratic majority is focused on urgent business. The authoritarians conspiring to supplant American-led peace and prosperity did not ease up while the Senate was in recess. Our adversaries are resolved to exploit American weakness and hesitation, and we've given them quite enough.
Also on the Senate agenda today, the swearing in of George Helmy as New Jersey's newest senator. He replaces former Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, who resigned last month. Mr. Helmy previously served as New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy's chief of staff. Now, on Speaker Johnson's government funding proposal, according to multiple reports, that 6-month temporary government funding bill also includes a provision that requires proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote. And we heard Senator Schumer's reaction to that plan. It has also gotten a strong reaction from House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. In a Dear Colleague letter, he called the proposal, quote, unserious and unacceptable. He goes on to say, quote, in order to avert a GOP-driven government shutdown that will hurt everyday Americans, Congress must pass a short-term continuing resolution that will permit us to complete the appropriations process during this calendar year and is free of partisan policy changes inspired by Trump's Project 2025. There is no other viable path forward that protects the health, safety, and economic well-being of hardworking American taxpayers. That part of a Dear Colleague letter from House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. House Oversight Committee member Pat Fallon, a Republican of Texas, talked about the voter ID proposal earlier today on Fox News.
This is common sense legislation. The fact that it is right now the honor system. You just have to check a box when you use a federal voter registration form and promise that you're a U.S. citizen. And we know that 11 million people have crossed the southern border under this administration. And it is not, as the senator from Arizona said, a solution or problem looking for a solution. Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It is a major problem. We do need a solution, considering that the last election was decided by about 80,000 votes out of well over 100 million cast. There's nothing more sacrosanct in a republic than to make sure you have secure, honest, transparent, and open elections.
The two House Republicans have already said they won't support Speaker Johnson's bill. Matt Rosendale of Montana announced on X today that, quote, a continuing resolution will only continue Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's radical policies and Pelosi's unsustainable spending levels. And Thomas Massie of Kentucky posting earlier today, quote, Congress is spending our country into oblivion, and this bill doesn't cut spending. And Republicans can only afford to lose 4 votes on the deal if all the Democrats vote no. Axios Capitol Hill reporter Julie Grace Brufke talked about why Republicans are pushing this now.
Republicans kind of see it as a way to kind of force the Senate's hand on this, and conservatives feel like it's an important topic. Democrats kind of say that voting when you're not a citizen is already illegal, so it's kind of a redundant bill there and a non-starter for them. But it was definitely something that conservatives really pushed Johnson on, and it's something that he's been very supportive of and vocal on in the past.
So if it's a non-starter, then what happens coming back to that September 30th deadline, 13 House work days and 15 Senate work days?
Well, I feel like even getting the Republican bill through the House might be kind of a challenge for Johnson there. We've heard Thomas Massie, Matt Rosendale say that they're anti-CRs in general, so we'll see if they're able to get enough votes on board. They're supposed to whip it tonight, and looks like it'll be kind of a standoff between chambers. And I've talked to some moderate Republicans that kind of expect for the SAVE Act language to eventually be stripped out and then to kind of get jammed by the Senate there. But a few days to go, so we'll see how it all kind of pans out.
Explaining some of these terms, a CR, a continuing resolution to keep the government funding. When you say they're going to whip it tonight, what does that mean?
So they're going to see how many votes they have, kind of try and encourage members to get behind the legislation and kind of get a fuller picture of where the support is.
And you've reported on Mitch McConnell and his feelings about attaching to the SAVE Act to this legislation. How is he factoring in on the Senate side?
I think there have been some reservations on the Senate side. I think they know that it's not going to go anywhere over there. It's Democrat-controlled Senate. And so I think eventually we'll probably see a CR that ends up passing over on the House side there that ultimately doesn't have that language in there.
And then when you talk about the length of the CR, there's no agreement yet on how long this should go on for. They have to set the date for how long they'll let the government essentially run on autopilot or previous funding levels. Why are the two sides not agreeing on the amount of time for this?
Well, I feel like Republicans over on the House side, they'd like to punt it to next year. I've talked to conservatives that have said they'd like to kind of see things, if Trump ultimately wins next year, they feel like they can get a more conservative deal. Now, Democrats would like to kind of see things punted to December, tee up a lame duck fight. They feel like they can kind of get more wins out of that timeline.
Why do Democrats think they can get more wins in a lame duck fight?
I mean, I feel like, especially right now, I feel like Democrats are also feeling bullish on where things stand with where Harris is in the election there. But I mean, right now, they see that timeline is their best for negotiating things out. And right now, they've got Democrat control of the Senate, and Republicans are feeling good about where they're at with picking up seats in the Senate. So that could be a factor in there.
Axios Capitol Hill reporter Julie Grace Brufke on Washington Journal this morning. You can see more at cspan.org and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. President Biden has also weighed in on Speaker Johnson's proposal, saying Republicans are choosing, quote, brinksmanship over finding a bipartisan government funding solution. Here's Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with more.
The proposal from House Republicans is not a solution. It's just not. It contains a partisan poison bill, would erode our national defense, undermine our competition with China, fail our veterans and seniors, abandon communities struck by disasters, and hurt programs that support small businesses while making healthy tax cheats pay what they owe. So House Republicans should stop wasting time. I've said this many times before, repeat it at this podium, and to do their jobs for the American people by keeping the government open. It is a simple job. It's their number one job as Congress, is to keep the government open, and we believe it should be with a short-term CR. Selena.
On that point about government funding, how is the White House engaging with the Hill on this, and does the president have any plans to meet with congressional leaders in the coming days?
So I'll take the first question. OMB, Leg Affairs Office, are in close touch with House and Senate leadership on the need to pass a short-term CR to keep the government open. And I laid out what it would do if we didn't, and what it would erode, example, for our national security, as we just had the National Security Council rep here. We're coordinating with Democratic leadership on the best path forward for a short-term CR. And so this is something that, again, they need to do right away. They've done it before, many times before, in a bipartisan way. It is their number one job. Again, OMB and our Leg Affairs Office. And to your second question, the president speaks regularly with congressional leaders and gets updated regularly as well from his staff. And Congress knows how to do this. They do. They know how to do this. This is the most basic thing, most basic part of their job, is to keep the government open. So they know this. They don't need to hear from the president on this directly. They know this. They know this. And they can do it in a bipartisan way, as they have in the past.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre earlier today at today's White House briefing. Right now on the House floor, members are considering several bills involving national security threats posed by China. First votes have been scheduled for 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time today. You can always watch live coverage of the House on C-SPAN, the Senate always live on C-SPAN 2, and all of our congressional coverage at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. You're listening to Washington Today.
Discover the heartbeat of democracy with C-SPAN Voices 2024 as we engage voters ahead of the first debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, asking, what issue would you like for them to address and why?
Hi, my name's Olivia. I'm from South Jersey, and the issue I want to hear more about would be women's rights and the protection of women and children, especially within cities.
Hi, I'm Molly Edwards. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I think the issue that's most important to me is abortion rights.
We need to do something with these guns, these people with these guns. A lot of innocent people losing their lives, and it must stop. It has to come to an end.
I would like to hear them talk about child care in the future, as well as housing prices, since that's the future that a lot of us would like to get into, and I would like to know how best I can go into that in the future.
C-SPAN's Voices 2024. Be a part of the conversation.
Getting ready for the next presidential debate? It's Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. Here's a type of question which, if history is any guide, probably won't be asked.
My question is, how can you or any president, whoever is elected next time, keep that pledge without running this country deeper into debt and passing on more of the bills that we're running up to our children?
That was Bob Schieffer of CBS News. The 2004 debate between Republican President George Bush and Democrat John Kerry. How frequently, or actually infrequently, have debate moderators asked presidential candidates about the national debt? What have the candidates themselves said about the debt? And how much was the national debt when it was first mentioned in the debate? And how much is it today? Find out in the latest episode of C-SPAN's podcast, The Weekly. Find C-SPAN's The Weekly wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today. House Foreign Affairs Chair Michael McCaul spoke to the media about his committee's investigation into the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan.
This was a catastrophic failure of epic proportions. Some say Saigon was the worst. I say this was, for many reasons. The fatal flaw, as we had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, CENTCOM Commander, General McKenzie, and General Miller on the ground, what was the problem in Kabul, in Afghanistan, at Bagram? Sir, there was no plan. State Department by law has the authority authorized by Congress to come up with a plan of evacuation known as the NEO. State Department wholly failed in that responsibility. Don't take my word for it. The fact is, the plan wasn't even initiated until the Taliban had overrun Kabul and were on their way to the embassy when Ambassador Wilson, charged with coming up with a plan and initiating it, fled to the airport, HKIA, leaving his employees behind, leaving the Afghan people who put their lives on the line behind. Thousands of classified documents, just like at Bagram, $7 billion of equipment in Bagram. He leaves his troops behind. What a coward. What happens after that? The Taliban is put in charge of the first checkpoint to check American citizens, Afghan partners and allies, and the women and children left behind. The Taliban is given the authority to say, no, you cannot go behind me. We have the testimonies of the beatings. If they got past there, then they had our consulates. Very few, by the way. Then what happens on that tragic day? Predictably, when you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. This was a failure for everyone, but especially these families standing behind me.
Committee report comes after a 3-year investigation into the U.S. exit in Afghanistan. It alleges the Biden administration prioritized optics over personnel security and its failure to prepare for civilian evacuations, exposed Defense and State Department employees to lethal threats and emotional harm. Here's more from Chair McCaul.
We knew the gate, Abbey Gate. Yet these Marines were sent in, unprotected, left out to dry by their government, asked to stand by their sworn enemy, the Taliban, to defend this airport. And what happens? Suicide bomber, guess where he comes from? Bagram prisons. Thousands of ISIS-K released. By the way, some have entered the United States. Bomb goes off. 13 servicemen and women killed. 170 Afghans killed. 45 Americans and Afghan civilians wounded. And the sad thing is, it could have been prevented if we just had a plan. It could have been stopped. Nothing will take back their children's lives. Yes, they will be receiving a gold medal, congressional gold medal tomorrow, well deserved, on behalf of their children and loved ones, posthumously. But nothing can bring them back. It was one of the deadliest attacks in 20 years because there wasn't a plan. Lastly, what is the fallout? Saigon? No, this is worse. What happens after Afghanistan falls? Weakness is projected around the globe. Our enemies and adversaries see weakness, not strength. The Russian Federation, within months, moves into Ukraine because they see this is their moment. Then the unholy alliance with Chairman Xi, China, threatening Taiwan and the Pacific together. Then, in the Middle East, the Ayatollah raises his ugly head with his proxies Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthi rebels, all as a result of Afghanistan. It all goes back to Afghanistan.
You can see all of Chair McCaul's press conference at cspan.org. It's also on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Connecticut Democrat and Senate Foreign Affairs Committee member Chris Murphy is pushing back on the report. He talked about it today in an appearance at the Atlantic Council.
Well, Senator, I'm glad you raised that because, of course, the House Foreign Affairs Committee has just released a new report on the Afghanistan withdrawal. That was more than 3 years ago. Have you seen it, sir?
I have not. No.
Okay. Well,
I have not read it.
It includes accusations that the Biden administration lied about what was taking place in Afghanistan, and of course blames Vice President Harris a bit more, and or at least includes her more than in previous reports. Do you think there is any fairness in suggestions that the chaotic nature of that withdrawal has shaped the conflicts that have erupted around the world in the 3 years in the following up to now?
No. To the contrary, in fact. Had the United States remained mired in Afghanistan in an open-ended way, we would have been distracted from the hard work we needed to do to be able to build a global coalition that has repelled Russia inside Ukraine, that has frustrated every single one of Russia's ambitions. Russia thought they'd be in Kyiv within a month. They thought they would shatter Europe. They thought they would weaken NATO. None of that has come true. We were able to build that coalition. The Biden administration was able to do that in part because we weren't committed to a war in Afghanistan where we were not making progress. Similarly, our work to try to confront the rise of China, to build a new global coalition to make sure that China doesn't end up dominating the rules of the new economic order, that work was possible, again, because we were not mired in the Afghan conflict. Everybody needs to remember that the document that committed the United States to withdraw from Afghanistan was not signed or initiated by Joe Biden. It was signed and initiated by Donald Trump. In fact, he put us on an unrealistic timeline for withdrawal that tied the hands of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And let's also be honest, nobody could have predicted the overnight disintegration of the Afghan military and Afghan government. Once that was set in motion, I don't think there's any way for there not to be some level of disorder and chaos around that withdrawal. Joe Biden did the best job he could in managing a withdrawal timeline set by Donald Trump that was deeply unrealistic and flawed. In the long run, I think it was really important for U.S. national security interests for the United States to divest itself from the Afghanistan conflict. And I frankly think that there's not much of an appetite in the American public for an argument that we should still be there. The act of withdrawing from Afghanistan was a difficult one, but it was one that was supported by the American public.
Connecticut Democrat and Senate Foreign Affairs Committee member Chris Murphy talking to Kaylee Lenz, Bloomberg News anchor and markets reporter. You can see all of that event at cspan.org. Campaign 2024 news now, and our live coverage of tomorrow night's ABC News presidential debate begins with a preview show at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can hear it here live on C-SPAN Radio. The two candidates have been taking time off the campaign trail to prepare. Vice President Harris has spent the last 4 days in Pittsburgh doing highly choreographed debate prep. That's according to multiple reports, while former President Trump has been holding informal policy sessions with a small team of advisors that includes Florida Republican Representative Matt Gaetz and former Hawaii Democratic Representative Tulsi Gabbard. Yesterday on ABC News This Week, former Democratic National Committee Chair Donna Brazile talked about what she thinks the vice president's goal should be.
Well, first of all, she has to own the future. She has to walk into that room and own that stage. He's a showman. I totally agree with the governor. He's a showman. He's been preparing for this for the last 20 years because Donald Trump knows the TV, he knows the angles, he knows the cameras, and he knows...
Instinctively.
The guy is one of the greatest marketers in my entire lifetime. I mean, maybe someone else exists. But she has to own this debate in terms of her messaging and making sure that she talks to the American people and tell them up front, let's talk about inflation. Let's talk about it. We've had to wrestle this damn thing down. Let's talk about gas prices. Let's talk about, I mean, she has to own this. And also, I would remind her about Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest, champions in the universe. But when he went into that first fight with Sonny Liston, they asked the underdog, what's your approach? He said, well, I'm going to sting like a butterfly. No, I'm going to
float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
Thank you very much. He said, your hands can't see, how I'm going to do this. So she has to take that same messaging in her spirit and go in there and not be intimidated or rattled by what is essentially someone who knows how to hurl insults at you.
Meanwhile, former New Jersey Republican Governor Christie talked about how the former president prepares for important moments like this.
He doesn't get ready. I mean, as someone who was in charge of debate prep in 2016 and 2020 for him, it was a constant struggle. There were times when we would go and debate prep would be scheduled. We'd go in to sit with him and he would just say, no, I'm not doing it. and that would be it. And it just wouldn't happen. And so my guess is that, especially now, as you said in the lead up, his 7th general election presidential debate, he really doesn't think he needs to prepare. He believes that just whatever his gut instincts are what's going to carry him. He will allow people to speak at him for a while. I will guarantee you there's been no mock debates. There never has been. He won't allow it, won't permit it. So he will be typically Donald Trump, which is he's just going to go in there and wing it. And that's why I think what Kamala Harris does in this debate is significantly more important than what Donald Trump does, because he's going to be him. He's just going to wing it. You've seen this show before. She's the one that's going to get the most attention.
One question that's being asked in advance of tomorrow night: will moderators David Muir and Lindsay Davis fact check? ABC News Washington Bureau Chief Rick Klein told the New York Times today, quote, I don't think it's a yes or no proposition. He went on to say, quote, we're not making a commitment to fact check everything or fact check nothing in either direction. We're there to keep a conversation going and to facilitate a good, solid debate, and that entails a lot of things in terms of asking questions, moving the conversation along, making sure that it's civilized. That's from the New York Times. Well, Vice President Harris's husband, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, was on the campaign trail today. He was in Raleigh, North Carolina.
There's a debate tomorrow. And the one thing she did say to the press yesterday was simply, I'm ready. It was like, she's ready. And, I was a pretty good trial lawyer myself in my lawyer days. And, as couples, you have these, I won't call them arguments. I call them discussions. And every single time we get into a debate at home, I realize I already lost because she's such a good lawyer. She's always planted these little traps for me that I always walk into. So I haven't won one. But she is a first-rate lawyer, a first-rate intellect, and she does not tolerate any BS. For her entire career, starting as a prosecutor, then attorney general, putting away sexual offenders, taking down transnational gangs, shutting down a nonprofit college that was ripping off people. Oh, that all sounds familiar. Her North Star has always been fighting for us and standing up to cowards. Kamala Harris can smell weakness, and we know that cowards are weak, and she can see one from a mile away. And she knows the best way to take a coward on is head on, right in their face. So the contrast tomorrow on that stage is going to be very clear. A lifelong public servant who has only had one client, us, the people, versus a guy whose only client has been himself, because that's all he cares about.
Again, live coverage of tomorrow night's ABC News presidential debate begins with a preview show at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Then the debate begins at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. You can hear it here live on C-SPAN Radio and watch it live on C-SPAN 2. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley is pushing back on criticism of her support for Donald Trump. Of course, she ran against him in the Republican primaries earlier this year. Specifically, words from former Wyoming Republican Representative Liz Cheney, who said yesterday that she doesn't understand Haley's support of the former president, quote, in any kind of a principled way.
I respect her decision, but she can't say my decision is not principled. It actually is. We can either vote based on style or we can vote on substance. I'm voting based on substance. I'm looking at the fact we can't live the next 4 years like we did the last 4 years. This is no contest. Harris raised taxes. Trump reduced taxes. Harris wants to stop any energy production. Trump built it up. Harris is weak on national security. Trump was strong on national security. Harris has allowed the border to be infiltrated by 8 million people. Trump was much harder on the border. This is about my family. This is about America. These are about issues. We should be very clear. If you don't like him, say you don't like him, but you can't say that his policies are worse than Kamala Harris's. That's just not a fact.
So you obviously don't take that personal, and it's about the country. Will you go to the point where you appear on stage with him at rallies? Because there's a huge, I think there's a sizable portion of the, especially in the primary, you proved it, that support you only.
I've made it clear to him a couple of things. One, that he needs to go out and ask for the vote of conservative and moderate Republicans, suburban women, independents, conservative Democrats. This is going to be a tight election. He needs to go say, I need your vote. And the second thing is, I'm on standby. I'm happy to be helpful. I don't want to see Kamala Harris win. He's the candidate. He can decide whether he needs my support or not.
But you would do it?
Absolutely.
You would go on stage. Why do you think Kamala Harris has a 14-point lead in the gender gap among women?
I think it's because Donald Trump and J.D. Vance need to change the way they speak about women. You don't need to call Kamala dumb. She didn't get this far, just by accident. She's here. That's what it is. She's a prosecutor. You don't need to go and talk about intelligence or looks or anything else. Just focus on the policies. When you call even a Democrat woman dumb, Republican women get their backs up too. The bottom line is we win on policies. Stick to the policies, leave all the other stuff. That's how he can win.
Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley and 2024 Republican presidential candidate speaking earlier today on Fox and Friends. And a final round of state primaries happen tomorrow in 3 states. New Hampshire voters will make their choices to replace outgoing Republican Governor Chris Sununu, and a familiar name is favored on the GOP side, former Senator Kelly Ayotte. And in Delaware, Democratic State Senator Sarah McBride is running to be the state's at-large House member. If she wins tomorrow and then goes on to win in November, she would become the first openly transgender member of Congress. And in Rhode Island, Republicans will choose between State Representative Patricia Morgan and Raymond McKay as their nominee for U.S. Senate against likely Democratic nominee and incumbent Sheldon Whitehouse. You can find all of our Campaign 2024 coverage at cspan.org/campaign and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is talking about the 2022 assault on her husband, Paul. She spoke about it on ABC's The View.
He's doing okay. He's coming along. A little more time. Getting hit on the head 3 times is a
hammer.
Horrible thing. And that was physical, but the traumatic effect for him, for us, for the family, but also for other political families as well, just families in America. Violence has no place in any resolution of any discussion you may have. So again, what was sad, though, Wolfie, was that it was horrible. It was horrible when it happened. It was horrible. We didn't even know if he was alive when we first heard about the attack. But before you could even say anything, your friend, who shall remain nameless, he was on there making a joke of it, and people were laughing, and his family was making a joke, and Republican governor making jokes and that, and that's just horrible.
Sick.
It's sick. It's really sick. Even as recently as one of his speeches the other day, he said she has a wall around her. We don't have a wall around our house. He's always projecting. He probably has a wall around his house. We don't have one around our house, and that didn't help her out there very much. To make a joke of that, and then they laughed at that. So that the trauma of it all is not just the physical, but the impact of the rest of it. But thank you for asking. Well, he'll see. So he'll be
and any time Donald Trump attacks you or your family, you wear it as a badge of honor.
Of course.
Well, Madam Speaker.
That attack was carried out by David DePape, who was targeting Nancy Pelosi. She was not at home at the time. He entered the house in the middle of the night and hit Paul Pelosi over the head with a hammer, causing him serious injuries, including that fractured skull. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. A reminder that Washington Today is available as a podcast. You can find it at cspan.org/podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app or wherever you get your podcasts. It's also on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more of the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our free daily email, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
Watch the ABC News presidential debate simulcast live Tuesday on C-SPAN 2 as the candidates go head-to-head in their first debate since securing their party's nominations. Coverage begins with a preview show at 8 p.m., followed by the debate at 9 p.m. Eastern. The ABC News presidential debate simulcast live Tuesday on C-SPAN 2. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of politics. Powered by cable.